I'm looking forward to this panel. This is another panel to highlight local resources for families that are struggling with violent death or unnatural death. And these people have never presented before, so it's always a bit of an adventure when you have a panel like this. But I look forward to that because often when you do have panelists that know one another too well, that comes across in their presentations. So a lot of these people, I think, are going to be struck by novelty and something new and different, and they're not going to be able to repeat themselves either. And I'm not going to go into any detail about the individual presenters and their backgrounds. I've asked them to say something about themselves at the beginning of their own presentations, and you have a paragraph about each of them in your program. But Don Meyer and Steve Redmond and Mark Russell and Laura Takis are all approaching this from a different sort of perspective. I thought it was very important that we have a member of the clergy here to talk with us about spirituality and those sorts of issues after a violent death or sudden death. And this happened with Don and his son, as he's going to talk about it some length. And he's also written a very touching book I want you to know about. And we have copies of that available?
We do have copies, and I'll be reading from it.
Okay, good. And Steve Redmond, who's been with the Seattle Police Department for 25 years, and I thought it was really important to have somebody representing the police because often they're the first people that are called into this tragedy, and a circumstance that's not only tragic for them and the family, but for them personally in terms of the trauma they're exposed to. And Steve's been very sensitive in addressing the emotional needs of first responders, which I think is a unique program that we're going to hear about. Mark Russell is a clinical psychologist who was in the military for 20 plus years and got so enraged about what was going on in the military in terms of the mental health service that I'm not sure that they were sad to see you go, Mark. This is after several national settings where he was serving as a sort of a witness, so that he not only is here to talk about suicide in the military, but about some of the problems in delivering mental health services to our service members. And finally, Laura Takis, who's been running restorative retelling groups and is going to talk with us about some of the specific techniques for dealing with some of the traumatic imagery that family members are left with after a violent dying in a restorative way. So let's begin with Don. Don, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. I'm United Church of Christ clergyman, associated most recently with Plymouth Church nearby. And because I'm a clergyman, that means I'm associated with God some way or another, okay? And so, because that word, God, squirts out in all kinds of different directions, a lot of associations were fairly much negative or dismissive or whatever, I'd rather than say what I think about God, I'm going to tell you what I think about the universe, okay? So this, instead of it being a lecture disguised as a sermon, will be a sermon disguised as a lecture or something like that. Okay, thanks to Dr. Jordan about that. So here we go. 1, we live in a life-giving relational universe. Okay? Relational at all levels. Number 2, from the standpoint of us, or as human beings, the personal relationship is the most significant relationship, which is a source of a lot of pain, as well as deep joy. 3rd, the universe is characterized by choice. I think probably at all levels, what little I know about quantum physics just suggests, I don't know anything about it at all, but I choose to believe that from what little I've read, okay? And because not all choices are life-giving, the universe is permeated with grace. Or what might be called, we heard from Dr. Suzuki, right? About self-compassion. Well, maybe we're talking about cosmic compassion, which is the chance to make another choice, since the first one didn't go very well, okay? And grace is not just a nice sentiment that we sing about, you know. It's a force, okay? And it's a necessary force for the continuing, for survival, and certainly for abundant life, okay? I can't imagine working with people recovering from suicide, the suicide of a loved one, without a concept of grace. Anyway, then there are two texts which are important to me to be a little bit more clergy-like, okay? The first is, there's nothing in life nor death which can separate us from the love of God. Nothing. Period. Whether or not that love or God is acknowledged. It's there anyway. Secondly, Jesus' odd comment, how blessed are those who grieve? They shall be comforted. Now, that sounds odd until you invert it. Those who do not grieve cannot be comforted. With me? Okay? You got to acknowledge the grief in order to, otherwise you're just stuck with it. Okay? So, those convictions inform my reflections on my own suicide attempt when I was 18, out of a deep depression. They were my response to the suicide of a colleague and a good friend about 45 years ago, who had taken her own life after a diagnosis with multiple sclerosis. And then a few other times when I've had to deal with, had the chance to deal with persons who were still grieving. Usually this is surprising me, didn't know it. But because of someone who had taken their own life long ago, and were still troubled by that, usually in kind of a guilty kind of way. So these convictions were also grounded me in the book that I wrote, which didn't start out to be a book. It was just letters to our son Peter when he was killed in a one-car accident. Letters to Peter on the journey from grief to wholeness. And they are in two sections. The first part says, Through the Dark Valley. It covered 3 years of letters, about 130 pages, a torrent of letters, and never intended for publication. And a second section, From Lament to Sweetness, about 30 pages, 5 years later, From Lament to Sweetness, okay? And I'll try to remember to say a little bit about why that title. These were never, as I say, never intended for publication. They were, except for the first letter, which was for our son's memorial service. And after that, I just kept writing. It was a way to process our group. I'm waving at my wife over there because she was our first leader, my first reader for every one of the letters. The fact that these were private freed me to express myself. And so we'll read. These maybe, this may be an example of what somebody who maybe like me are inclined to process things with words might be helpful, okay? So this is a little bit from the part of the letter which were written originally for a memorial service, April 8th, 1998. Dear Peter, I'm writing this on Wednesday afternoon, April 8th, 1998, as a draft for something which might be read at your memorial service. I do not want to be doing this. I've always liked writing about you. I've had nearly 40 years of writing for memorial services, and I'm good at it. But as our colleague and good friend Jim Haffiger said to me a couple of days ago, it's just for the wrong person, isn't it, Don? He's right. Fine memorial service, but for the wrong person. Your brother Tim gave us the news, you know. I fumbled for the phone in the dark bedroom, snorting about middle of the night wrong numbers. But then Tim got right to it with word sounds forever chiseled deep into my soul. Very, very, very bad news. Peter was killed tonight. When you stopped for gas about 3 a.m. on the way from Bainbridge Island to your place in Portland, I doubled over with the convulsive sobs which go on and on whenever the reality of death penetrates my protective denial. Your mom held me with, I suppose, the same comforting tenderness with which she held you when you were little and frightened. My vocalized sobs were saying, I don't want, I don't want, I don't want. The little child in me, as well as the mature adult, does not want your death, Peter. Damn it, Peter. Why didn't you wear that seatbelt? You know, of course, that ever since the news got around, we've had practically a continuous party at your house. It's odd to call it a party because whenever somebody else arrives, we're convulsed with sobs all over again. But then we start talking about you, and pretty soon we're convulsed with laughter. Same stomach muscles involved, I've noticed. And we're going to party again right after this service. And again for you and Linda on your 10th wedding anniversary. And again for your 38th birthday. I'm telling you this because I know how much you love parties, and you're going to miss all this. Serves you right. But we've got to party because you are missing. And we need to throw all the bright resources we can marshal against the dark powers of death to which your death has left us so vulnerable. Fortunately, we believe that God knows what it feels like for us to lose you. God knows how much we disbelieve that we can get through it all without you. We want to trust that God understands how it is with us. God went through his own Holy Week once, and surely God hurts for our hurt. But after the horror of Good Fridays and the black emptiness of those Saturdays, there are Easter Sundays. We trust that in time, with the comfort of God's compassionate, life-giving Spirit, we'll come to know more about Easter, more than we've ever known before. This Peter's death happened on Palm Sunday evening, and so it was in that holy season, which brings it back annually for us every year. And then this is a few days later. Dear Peter, as I write the words, Dear Peter, I find myself shaking my head. I discover myself doing that a lot while I'm sitting, walking, driving, quite without being aware of it at the time. I suppose that means I still can't believe that you are gone, forever, irrevocably out of our lives, and that you've been gone for 11 days. I can't take it in. I suppose I shake my head because I don't want to take it in. Today, it seems unreal all over again, less real than last week. Perhaps that's why the sobs which convulse me have not happened for a while. This is now more of a shadowed time, a time when we experience everything from the shadow of your death. But not all the time, Pete. Sometimes we just seem to forget your death has happened. The world goes on doing its daily stuff, and we go on doing it with the world, which does not seem to know that the world has been irrevocably changed. Better to say, the world ended just after 11 p.m., April 5th. Then a new world began so quickly that a lot of the world never noticed. But there are some in the world who do notice. A letter came today addressed to the estate of Peter Mayer. All of us wish the change were revocable, that the world had not ended. It was a much happier world with you in it, Pete. How often in our fantasies we wish you had your seat belt buckled and airbag deployed, allowing you miraculously to escape death. Chelsea's wish, 5-year-old daughter, Chelsea, Chelsea's wish is expressed differently. Isn't God strong enough to bring my daddy back to life? It's a question which is far more significant and logical for this Easter season than questions about the Easter bunny. God brought Jesus back. Why not Daddy? The shadow of your death, Peter, falls on everything, and we're often angry about it. Your sister Sarah sheds tears of rage about the now shadowed joy in the birth of her little son, Peter, because you are not here to hold your namesake. I'm skipping a few letters as we go on here, and I'm not reading all of them. This is, I'm about to depart for a church conference in Cleveland, Ohio. And I write on April 23rd, Dear Peter, I want to tell you about a neat little conversation with Chelsea. That's the daughter, 5 years old. It happened a couple of days after memorial service. Maybe you overheard it. Grandpa, is my daddy still in that box? No, Chelsea, we just used it for the service. What did they do with it? Well, Chelsea, they did something called cremating, which means they turned your daddy's body into ashes. Then one of these days, we'll go get the ashes, and we'll put some of the ashes in special places where we want to remember your daddy, like up on Mount Hood. Uncle Tim is going to put some ashes where he is going to plant a beautiful tree by his new deck. We're going to take some ashes to Bainbridge Island, and we're going to plant a tree in our yard there, too. And I'm sure you'll put some in Lake Shasta. Oh, what about the sharks? Well, there are no sharks in Lake Shasta, Chelsea, and besides, they wouldn't be interested in ashes. I want to put some at our house. Sure, Chelsea, that will be fine. One other day, she came downstairs early just as I was bringing in your paper. Nobody else was up, or at least not visible. Grandpa, could you just sit down and hold me for a while? I did. We'll all do our best, Pete. Love, Dad. At this conference, I met a college friend I hadn't seen for a long time, and I talked about the death of Peter and how it happened. This is the letter to Peter, April 27th, in flight on the way back from Cleveland. In part, I said to Peter, I had described how you died, that it had been such a wonderful day for you, as well as for Mom and me a couple of thousand miles away from you, up until that moment you hit the tree. Seatbelt not buckled. Irv said, it seems so unnecessary. Geez, Pete, that sure says it. It's a feeling that we have come back to again and again. We keep wanting to rewind the videotape, play it over, have it come out differently. My head tells me not to mess with the if-onlys, but my heart goes there again and again and again. Simple, insignificant neglect with such enormous life and death consequences. Click, life. No click, death. God, how could it be, how can it be that you, all of us should suffer such an irreparable tearing so quickly, so finally, with no time to warn or to protest or to fight for life, even against impossible odds? No time to pray, no time to hang on to even impossible hope. Instead, dead. Just like the period at the end of this sentence. Dead. Period. Unnecessary. Dead. Oh, Peter, I don't want. Love, Dad. Later, in flight, Dear Peter, I'm sorry I left you with that awful centering on the unnecessariness of your death. Surely if you are as alive and aware as my faith claims you must be, surely you must be grieving even more than we, the missed moment when you might have simply lifted your left hand to grab the metal insert and click it into the buckle. That phrase, all the company in heaven, was used in our communion service last night. I never expected you to be among that company in heaven. My mom, yes, and we'll be glad when my dad joins them. I'm sure a triumphant welcome for that old, young, and fearless prophet. But you, Pete, what the hell are you doing there? Psalm 90 did not fit my present take on God's relation to the inhabitants of the universe. It doesn't say, thou shalt not dash thy head against the car door frame. Thou shalt not smash thyself into a tree. In John 15, greater love has no one than the one who lays down his life for his friends. Yes, damn it, that's the way it's supposed to be, so that grief may be mingled with some honor and gratitude. But you didn't lay it down, you simply didn't protect it. My God. I was close enough to the table to see that the loaf of bread for communion was pre-cut almost all the way through. Bad symbolism, pretense, denial. Don't avoid the work of the breaking and the observing. Notice the particular way each particular loaf resists the breaking. Notice the tearing, the scattered crumbs, the messiness. When the wine was poured, rich, dark, red, good to see, I noticed for the first time it even looks like spurting blood. Did you bleed much, Peter? We don't know yet. Maybe we never will. One sleepless night I did have this image of your head encrusted with dried blood. I wanted to wash it away, cleanse the wound, hold your head. You cried like anybody else at my mom's, maybe more than anybody else at my mom's memorial service, your grandmother, more than anyone else, I think. Do you still cry now, Pete? Are spiritual bodies equipped with tear ducts? God will wipe away all tears. Everybody's, individually, it says. Tenderly, personally, I hope so. Yours, ours, mine. Love, Dad. Yeah. Okay. Dear Peter, the fact is I don't have your present address. It's not so much a question of to be or not to be. It's as is you is or is you ain't. Like everybody else in our particular faith family, I'm a child of the Enlightenment. Scientific method and all of that, experimental results replicated. If it's not measurable, it's not real. Once you were measurable, Pete, we have photographic evidence. You are now immeasurable, and we are experiencing immeasurable grief. There's no doubt about the living reality of our grief, however immeasurable. So how about the living reality of you, Pete, even though you are now immeasurable? Faith, like love, is ultimately a decision. But for me, it helps when the faith decisions are supported by some cosmological construct. So I am encouraged by every new scientific discovery which messes up all the old scientific beliefs in an essentially materialistic, soon-to-be-measured, dead universe. I did even before you were killed, Pete, in every hint that the universe is, after all, essentially organic, alive, immeasurable, above all, relational, and in its ultimate expression, personal. It makes absolutely no sense to me to reject as sentimental the notion that the self-giving love of God is the living heart of the universe. My assaulted and defiant heart says yes. Therefore, immeasurable as you may be, Pete, address unknown notwithstanding, I choose to believe you that you're with me in every word I write to you, even as I perceive that word in my consciousness before I scrawl it onto this paper. I rejoice in that faith. I want to see you again, hug you again, cry with you, hear your particular laugh and the way you say, hey, Mom, hey, Dad. I want to drink microbrews with you again on some well-crafted sun deck. I cherish the conviction and refuse to allow the impossibility of a genuine life. I just wish the hell you were still here. Love, Dad. The day after, on Mother's Day, we discovered that we went to see our daughter-in-law, Linda, and got some more news. And here is the letter. God damn it, Peter, I'd like to put my face 4 inches from yours and yell and yell and yell and yell and yell and yell. Jesus Christ, what a stupid way to die. When we got to Linda's apartment for supper tonight, your death certificate was there on the kitchen counter. Linda watched Mom and me look at it. Quote, contributing cause of death, acute ethanol intoxication. End quote. "What a stupid choice," Linda said as we sat down at the head of the table. "I was seduced like everybody else into thinking that your drinking was not that serious. I'd never seen you drink and drive. I'd certainly never seen you drunk. It was only after you hit the tree that Mom and I began to hear that sometimes you really got blasted at parties. Never a problem at work or home, just at parties." Shit! What the hell the difference does that make now? Now you are also one of those stupid statistics that everybody knows and most everybody like yourself ignores, assuming they are the exception, immune to the odds. And so you partied at the home of your friend Jim because of that golf game you had and so forth, celebrating the arrival of Chelsea and Linda just 13 days away. Damn, 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 damn. I noticed Linda cutting the asparagus and shaking her head. Booze in exchange for your life. What a hell of a trade-off. I'm going to propose to your friends Jim and Ann that they get a handgun for the next party and just put a cartridge in the cylinder. Give it a spin, pass it around instead of passing around another round of drinks. I didn't feel like eating. Don't feel like talking to anybody. I feel more tired than I've ever felt. Jesus, Peter. Why couldn't we see, you see, somebody see? You were flirting with death. You let yourself get seduced, Pete. Committed the ultimate adultery. No wonder we're all mad as hell. Why didn't we? Well, we found out later, the friends came and told about their day with the police, who had thoroughly investigated the accident, found skid marks. There had been no evidence that Peter was actually impeded by alcohol, although it's contributed. They speculated that something dropped out the dashboard. Linda broke into tears when she found a crumpled videotape, which had been on the dashboard. A deer, maybe, nobody knew. But we were, as the letter of that letter is entitled, we were left with blameless grief. Let me skip ahead to a last letter, 8 years later. Not quite the last, but almost the last. Lenny and I are on a Rick Steves tour, southern Italy. Dear Peter, I had not written for a long time. There was about an 8-year gap. Dear Peter, suddenly I want to write to you again. I've been waiting for this. I don't know why I stopped writing those 5 years ago. And I'm not sure why I want to write to you again. It must be because I want to share with you the deep joy of this time. These times, this year, marked so much not by your death, Peter, but by celebrations of our life 50 years after your mom and I were married. This trip to Sicily and South Italy is one of those celebrations, Pete, although I must say that your mom and I now come pretty close to celebrating every day. We certainly give thanks every day for the healing your mom and I have experienced in these 8 years since we were nearly shattered by your death. We enjoyed a splendid day. Then we gathered with our tour mates for hors d'oeuvres and wine on the terrazzo in front of our cave home, overlooking the mysterious beauty of ancient Sassi with its labyrinth of steep stairs leading to layers of cave homes down one side and the steep ravine up the other. Hilarious conversations became more quiet, personal, serious, and thoughtful, while against the Baroque sky the light of the setting sun slid up and off the tower of the old cathedral across the ravine, and little lights began to appear. It was all so rich and so beautiful that with certain private touch and exchange of glance, your mom and I signaled an agreement to skip dinner. No appetite anyway after all those Italian wines and cheeses and salamis on the terrace. You would have loved it, Peter. We slipped to our cave, showered, laughed uproariously at the reflected images of our pornographic poses in the full-length mirror, and we made love with playful freedom and long, deep gratitude. Afterward, I lay awake for a long time, Peter, too thrilled, too mysteriously elated to sleep. And I realized that I wanted finally to write to you again, to try to put into words what has happened to me and your mom ever since I last wrote. How is it that your mom and I are able to enjoy such an abundant life in spite of the massive loss of you? To say we miss you, Peter, is a huge understatement. But your loss no longer shadows the glad times in the way that it did. I think that realization contributed to my elation that night in the Sassi cave. It was such a thoroughly good and beautiful time. And I could not help but remember that in those long months after your death, in the midst of such a time, I would break into sobs so heavy the presence of your absence. How strangely blessed are we who grieve. Love, Dad.